Hello YouTube, welcome to Comprehensive Outdoors. I'm Jeff Hale. I make this channel so to help you hopefully become a more complete hunter and fisher. So trout season is just around the bend, and actually it's trout season right now, but since I'm on a COVID-19 lockdown, I'm not out fishing for trout, but I sure would like to be. And I've made earlier videos about fly fishing and how I got into fly fishing not because it's an art, but because it's super effective. And one of the ways fly fishing is very, very effective is when you're fishing on rivers and there's certain hatches of bugs coming off. And so we have local rivers right now where we would start dry fly fishing and fishing nymphs. And on most rivers, when you dry fly fish, in fact on pretty much every river, when you dry fly fish, you're gonna use a floating fly line. You can also use a floating fly line and nymph fish. And I want to talk about tippet because people ask me, well, what's tippet and what's a leader and what's the difference between the two? And so today I'm going to give you an explanation, and I want to keep it simple, yet I also want to give you the history. So I'm going to tell you some stuff about tippet that's really not important, that you'll hear people talking about. I just want you to have a basic understanding, and then you can kind of forget that. And then there's one thing I really, really want you to know, and that is what's the range that I can tie together in tippets, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So what is tippet? In fact, what's a leader? So when you're fishing a floating line, generally you're gonna start with, the standard is a 9-foot tapered leader down to a certain X. You'll hear like, oh, it could be 3X, 4X, 5X. Well, what does all that mean? So here's an example. This is made by Fenwick. This is a 9-foot tapered leader down to 2X, right? What does that mean? Well, what that means is if you took this leader and you unraveled it, right, you're gonna attach it onto the end of your fly line. The butt section would be very fat, like maybe about the diameter 25-pound test, and it gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner like a whip all the way down to the end, which they're calling 2X. And then you would tie your fly onto there, generally a dry fly, so that when you cast, the energy is transferred into your leader and lays the fly out correctly and lets it drift through the zone. Okay, so what's tippet? Well, here's spools of tippet. Here's some Rio Power Flex, that's 4X. Here's some Fenwick, that's 3X. So what's all this? What does all this mean? Well, let's say I'm using a 9-foot leader and I have 5X tippet on the end, or the very end of it, let's say the last 1.5 feet is what they're designating as 5X. And let's say I'm using a stimulator, which is a dry fly. It imitates a little stone fly, so an adult stone. So I tie that thing on there and I'm casting it out and I'm drifting and the fish aren't taking it. So I come in and I snip that off and I tie on a different fly. And I try that fly for a while. I'm using a number 14 elk hair caddis. I'm not getting anything with that. I cut that off. Then I put another fly on and I cast it out there, and then it gets tangled up. And I got this mess on the end of my line, so I cut that off. Well, now my 9-foot leader has been chewed up, and now I only got 7.5 feet. Well, that's not long enough. So I want to extend my leader back out to 9 feet. And so I can take a spool of 5X tippet and attach it to that original leader and get my 9 feet back. Or I could add a piece of 5X, then add a piece of 6X, and I could drop down in fly size and I could have an even longer leader. So that's what these tippets are, right? They're these pieces of level monofilament that you tie onto the end of your leader. Okay, here's where I'm gonna get into the history and the long-windedness of it, and then I'm gonna just break it down and make it simple for you. Okay, so when you talk about tippets, people like to talk about the rule of 11. I don't know if you can see that. Rule of 11, okay? And basically, you can have things like odd X tippet, 1X tippet, 2X tippet, all the way down to 8X tippet. Okay, great, so what? Well, the bigger the number, the smaller the tippet. And the reason is they use odd X, 0X as the baseline. And this is 11 thousandths of an inch. And that's where this rule of 11 comes in. And so when people build leaders, they're very interested in the diameters, right? Fly fishers are interested in the diameters of line, not necessarily the breaking strength, which brings me a point. You could go buy 2X tippet from, say, Rio, and then buy another spool of 2X tippet from Cortland, and they would be guaranteed to be the same diameter, but they might have different breaking strengths. So that's why it's important, if you're gonna buy tippet, buy a good quality tippet, because the better quality tippets have higher breaking strengths. Maybe not by much, but by some. So what's this rule of 11? Well, 11 minus 0 is 11. 11 minus 1 is 10 thousandths of an inch. 11 minus 2 is 9 thousandths of an inch. What if I had 5x tippet? Well, 11 minus 5 is 6 thousandths of an inch. Okay, great. Who cares? So these are the diameters of the line. This is overcomplicating fly fishing. What you really need to know is, whatever tippet size you're using, you can only add 2 steps down. To add more than 2 steps down, I mean, you can do it if you're in a pinch, but it's not optimal. To add more than 2 steps down creates too big of a gap and dissimilarity between the lines, and your energy transfer and your leader will not turn over correctly. So if I had a 9-foot 5x leader, that's 9 feet tapered down to 5x, and I chewed it up back to 7 feet, and I wanted to add line back on. Well, I could add 5x to it, another 2 feet of 5x. I could add another 2 feet of 6x, or I could add another 2 feet of 7x. Now, why would I want to go even lighter? Well, because what if I was going to go with a smaller diameter fly? The smaller the fly, the smaller the tippet. But anyway, all you need to remember is that you can't step down more than 2 sizes. That's the most important part. So regardless, if you know that you have a 4x tippet on the end of your line, and all of a sudden you don't want to fish a size 10 fly anymore, you want to fish a size 18, you can't just go tie in a 7x tippet directly to the 4x. You could do it, but it wouldn't work very well. The lines too dissimilar, you wouldn't get the correct rollout, and the knot wouldn't work great. Okay, so that's the one takeaway, is you don't want to tie, you don't want to have a gap of more than 2x. Now, I would never take a 5x and then tie on a 3x, because now I have a heavier piece of line on a lighter piece of line, and that's not going to work very well either. It's just going to break, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, whenever you tie tippet onto a leader, you want a line, you want a knot that works well for dissimilar diameters. And there's a million videos out there on this, but the best knot that I found for tying dissimilar diameters is a double surgeon's knot. It's very simple. You can tie it in the dark, you can tie it with cold hands. There's another knot that traditionally has been used in fly fishing called a blood knot, and I always joke that they call it a blood knot because you sweat blood when you try to tie it. A blood knot is a pretty knot and it's low profile, but it doesn't have the breaking strength in my experience as a double surgeon's knot. It seems like a double surgeon's knot when tied correctly is stronger. And a blood knot is only good for tying lines together that are very similar in diameter. If you wanted to attach dissimilar diameter lines, a double surgeon's knot is better. So that's the 2 takeaways from this video. That's what tippet is for. Tippet's to extend the length of your leader back out to the size you want it. Or tippet is to add and step down in leader diameter so that you can fish a smaller fly from a bigger fly, right? And what's the most you should step down? No more than 2 X's, okay? So that's the point of this video. Use the double surgeon's knot. It's easy to do. You can also learn the blood knot. That's fine. And some people use the double uni knot also. But in the next video, we're going to talk about how do I know what tippet size to use for the size of the fly that I'm going to use. All right. Well, I hope this helped you. And if you like my content, please subscribe. And I hope that pretty soon we're all out fishing rivers and lakes.